Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Webb, and I'm a marketing director here at Turn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled Reviving a Community to Support Your Customer Success Team. Before we get started, I do want to remind you that we are recording today's session, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides tomorrow afternoon. Throughout the presentation, we invite you to please submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address as many of those as we can at the end of this webinar. Now I'm pleased to introduce to you our speaker today. We have Shauna McClemens. Shauna is a community strategist for Higher Logic Vanilla, which is a top customer community platform that helps companies improve retention, reduce support costs, and fuel customer growth. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Shauna.
Thanks so much, Corey. Hey, everybody. My name's Shauna McClemens. I think that there's probably a few familiar faces out there today, as well as a few new ones. So great to meet you or to see you again. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been working in customer experience, specifically in customer success, for the greater part of my career, helping hundreds of communities develop a strategy and launch new communities. But I've also been called in to consult on communities that have been around for a while and have either wanted to focus more on customer success, scaling customer success, or just weren't seeing the results that they wanted. I've been in kind of a unique position where I've worked in customer success, helping folks get the most out of our product, which happens to be Higher Logic Vanilla, a SaaS community product. But for the last year or so, I've shifted the focus from the traditional one-to-one CSM or consultant model to a scaled customer success model using our own community software, something we affectionately call drinking our own champagne. So it's likely I've been in your shoes as a CSM or a consultant, but also as a community manager focused on scaled success. The framework I'm going to share with you today is the same framework that I used to help both new and existing communities develop strong strategies. And it's the same way that I approached our own Higher Logic Success community when I took it over as part of our Scaled Initiatives program. Using this framework, strategies and tactics that we're going to explore today, I was able to exceed the results that my exec team had asked of me. We saw significant increases in posting, active users, and staff participation. And perhaps more importantly, I was able to really drive this idea of using community as the hub of our customer success efforts. So no matter where you are in your community journey, whether you're coming in as a CX person or a community person, I hope these ideas and strategies will provide you with tactics that you can take back to your communities and help you get the results that you want. You'll also receive a copy of the slide deck as well as a handout with the framework being discussed today, so there's no need to take notes. We should have 15 or 20 minutes towards the end for questions, so don't forget to hit that Q&A button and we'll go through as many as we can. And any that we don't, we'll maybe do a blog post or something like that. So launch can get people excited in community. Usually there's a promotional plan, but what can we do to get them to sustain and continue this excitement for months and maybe even years to come? It's one thing to create excitement and another to keep folks' attention. We'll talk about specific tactics throughout this presentation, but I wanted to start out by reminding you not to exhaust yourself or your resources in the first leg of your journey. People often want to launch or relaunch with all the things, but keeping some of these ideas and tricks up your sleeve to sustain that excitement is important as well. So keep some of these ideas on a project plan to make sure you've got something great every month, every quarter, every year, and to really think about your community in the long term and not just in that short term. I think it's really important to consider the goals of your organization as a whole, as well as those of your department. If you're on this call, that's probably customer success, might be another one, and the goals of your end users when building out your community goals. So just really thinking from that top down or that bottom up view. As with any project, if you don't have clear goals, it's so easy to get off track. So this is really the starting point, and then from there, your goals might change and evolve. Think about what goals you've had in the past. Have you already achieved them, or is there still room for improvement? Do you want to focus on increasing efficiency and increasing retention? Do you want to focus on ticket deflection or gathering product feedback and feature requests? Or maybe it's more important to generate brand awareness and increase revenue opportunities. Maybe you want to focus on product adoption or identifying potential advocates. The big question here for me is your community ready to move on? One thing I can't emphasize enough is to not to try and do all the things at once. It's better to do 1 or 2 things really, really well than to try and do 10 things mediocrely. Think about what you're trying to achieve at this point in your community journey, and then focus on 1 or 2 of those elements at a time so that you can do them really, really well. When you launched your community, you likely had some goals in mind. As your organization evolves and as your community grows organically, those goals might change, and that's okay. It's so important to be curious. Talk to as many people as you can and figure out what activities will benefit them and their customers. This is also going to come in handy when it's time to leverage those personal relationships down the road. More on that in a little bit. Figure out where the gaps are today in your customer success journey and think creatively about how community can fill them in when considering what your current goals might be. Don't forget to zoom out and think about what kind of results your exec team wants to see out of community. If this doesn't align with what your customer success team and your customers want to see, you might need to do some additional brainstorming to think about how you can align these asks and build a community that supports your CS teams in a way that will also prove ROI to your execs. Okay, so once you've got a good idea of what you, your CS team, and your execs and your end users need, it's time to think about what kind of community you want to build to support those things. I want to start off by saying that this is not going to be an exhaustive list. We've got folks from diverse verticals on the call today, and your community type might depend on the type of organization you come from. It's completely okay to color outside the lines. Typically, I see communities with the following facets. We'll see things like support, where people are more focused on Q&A and getting answers to immediate questions or problems. Product, where folks might be sharing feedback and helping you build a more customer-centric roadmap. Customer enablement, where you might be a little bit more focused on how to use the product, how to onboard users effectively, talk about best practices, and where customers can share learnings with one another. Advocacy, this might be focused a little bit more on super users and driving advocacy, referrals, fans, things like that. And finally, a community of peers. This relies on the network effect. This is about folks who are coming together over a shared interest, and that might be your product or it might be the underlying interest surrounding your product. A lot of communities, particularly in the SaaS space, will begin with support and or enablement, maybe product, and then they'll move on to others. It's a common trap to try and be all things to everyone. Depending on where you are in your community journey, this might evolve over time. Be realistic about where you are, what gaps exist in your CX org and your org overall, and then evolve to the needs of your customers. Don't try and force a square peg in a round hole. I won't lie to you. It's not usually realistic to start with a community of peers or an advocacy community unless you've got a super strong base of those users who fall into those personas already. Typically, those use cases have to be mindfully cultivated over time from communities that originally started as communities of support, product, or enablement. If you're trying to build a success hub, you may have elements of the first 3 and see what customers respond to. Often customers will come for support and product, and they'll stay for the enablement pieces. And as we'll explore throughout the rest of this presentation, a sense of community. In most scenarios, it's only once you've established a strong community that it makes sense to move on to focusing on advocacy or a community of peers. When thinking about if your community is ready to move on, remember that age alone is not an indication of community maturity. Here's a couple things to consider when thinking about how mature your community is, where you can improve, and when the time will be right to move on to other facets of community. Pay attention to how your users are using the community naturally and see how that aligns with your business goals. You'll find a quiz to help you with this in the handout you'll receive after the presentation as well. I like to leverage analytics to better understand what areas of community are popular, but it's also important to actually just be in the community and see what's going on for yourself. Another thing to consider is, how is your staff engaging in the community today? Are there multiple departments involved? Are folks just answering questions and acting reactively, or are they posting proactive content? What kind of personas does the content that's in there today appeal to? Everybody or just a handful? What are the community goals? Do they align with the goals of your CX department and your organization as a whole? community journey is intimately tied to the user journey. In the beginning of your community journey, most members will be at the beginning of their journey as well. And as you begin to see your users mature, you'll also know that your community is also maturing and may be ready to layer on those additional use cases. I often work with communities that began as support communities where users are prompted to come to the community to solve a particular problem, and then they leave once they've got the solution. One of the key ways that you can drive community engagement and support your customer success team is to make that shift from reactive problem solving to proactive content. Think about what kind of content will help users move from this idea of, I need to solve a problem, to, ooh, look at this cool use case. I never thought about doing it that way. Or, ooh, I didn't know your software could do this cool thing. There's going to be change management here. You have to coach customers to go to community first. But as you begin to shift the conversation from transactional support to proactive tips and use cases and underlying areas of interest, they'll become increasingly inspired to come to the community regularly, not just when they have an immediate problem to solve. You'll want to secure buy-in from your internal teams to make this change. Understand what resources would not only make your users come to community, but make your staff members want to send them to community. From my own experience, we saw a lot of support questions and feature requests, but saw really increased engagement once we started talking not only about our community software, but about community management in general, and spotlighting features that would help customers achieve their goals, not just solve their problems. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how we can make all of those things happen. The main facets I usually like to explore with any community when thinking about driving engagement are, first of all, acquiring new users, getting your customers to sign up for community in the first place and come and check it out. Once they're in, engaging existing members, getting them to participate and come back to community. And once your community is a bit more mature, creating advocates that can help share thought leadership, use cases, and even referrals. Let's start talking about how you can get users to come to community in the first place. I think it's important to give users clear reasons to sign up. I'm a big advocate of creating calls to action on all guest, just unauthenticated users, folks who aren't signed in, on all guest-facing pages, so that folks who are not signed in and they actually see something that tells them what they're missing out on and why they should bother to hit that sign in or register button. Think about the what's in it for me factor. Communicating that value should also happen throughout the user journey. It should happen in the sales cycle, and you'll likely need to work with your implementation team, CSMs, to have those conversations as well. Bake the idea of sending new customers to community into any processes or playbooks your teams use already. Make the community the hub in any way you can. Integrations to other sites in your ecosystem, like learning management, docs, ticketing systems, and more, can be really key here. If your marketing and CS teams are already sending regular emails, help them out by providing links to great posts in community. It's likely they're already looking for additional content anyway. Get lists of your current customers and figure out which ones aren't in community yet, and send them an invitation, again, using those clear value statements around the purpose of your community and what's in it for them. All right, so you've got users in the community. Now you've got to keep them around. Think back to those conversations you had when you were creating goals for community. What value can the community provide? Maybe you've got different personas in your customer base that might come to community. What do those specific folks care about? You might need to put on a few different hats as you're doing this thought exercise. Send that content to users via newsletters, email digest. You've got to really inspire them to come back. You could consider sending a welcome email, again, with value statements and first steps they can take in community. You can send "we miss you" messages. This can be done either automatically or you can do it personally on a one-on-one basis if you've got that bandwidth. Gamification is another great way to create a sense of community and drive community retention. We'll explore that in more detail later in this presentation. And finally, events. Events can help customers connect with you as a community manager or community champion, as well as with each other. Folks are so much more likely to help each other out and answer each other's questions if they've made a personal connection with each other. We'll explore these tactics in more granular detail in just a little bit. As your community matures, you can start to think about how you can use community to drive advocacy. This might involve more advanced gamification techniques like LinkedIn or social shoutouts, shining a spotlight on special contributors with featured user of the month type content. If you identify a user who has great ideas or a super cool use case, consider asking them to host a joint event with you. And finally, be honest and genuine. If someone's really awesome, tell them that. But I find people respond best to authentic communication and appreciation, not saccharine lip service. Don't be fake about it. All right. Before we move on to looking at those community engagement tactics in more detail, I want to talk just a little bit about how to drive staff engagement, because I think it's so crucial to a successful community strategy, especially when focused on customer success. Driving staff to post engaging content in the community can be a challenge. Consider what problems they have in their day-to-day jobs that community can help solve. You'll hear me say this a lot in this presentation. You've got to think about what's in it for them. Are they already creating content that can be repurposed for a community? Offering to do the legwork is a great approach here. We'll talk in more detail about how to drive staff to create content a little later on, so make sure you stay tuned for that portion. Thinking about how you can integrate the community into, say, a Slack or another chat channel that staff can be tagged when a user relevant to them joins or posts something of interest. I know that when I was a CSM, I had Slack alerts set up to alert me every time someone mentioned one of my enterprise accounts. Maybe it's not Slack at your organization, but the point here is to make sure you're tying community into the processes and technology that your CS team is already using today to make things as easy as possible and to bake community into their current behaviors. Think about integrating the user journey into community. Customers usually interact with different departments throughout their relationship. So how does community fit in with each of these different steps and each of these different departments? Even though while building community, I sat on the CX org and was focused on customer success, I think it's still really important to consider all the different departments that touch the customer throughout their relationship when considering staff engagement. I encourage you to try and identify a community champion in each of these departments and build a relationship with them. Here are a few things to consider when engaging with each department. How can we make sure that they're interacting with the community regularly and driving customers to the community? What kind of content can they create that will benefit their customers within community? How can we make their jobs easier and more scalable using community? And finally, how can you naturally drive them to community on a regular basis and keep it top of mind for individuals in each department? These are just a few factors to consider. We'll touch on more of these throughout the presentation, but I really encourage you to think about the different departments you might have as you work to drive staff engagement to community. Okay, let's talk a little bit about user participation styles. I think it's important to consider the different participation styles that members might have. Some personality types might come in hot as creators, but most folks will start as consumers or maybe contributors. And they'll need to be encouraged and fostered to get them to that creator point. This isn't a new concept. We've seen this time and time again. It used to come up a lot as the 99-1 rule, which I think is outdated now that everyone's so plugged in. But the reason I like to think about these different types of participation is because I think that these different folks get different value out of community, and thinking about how we can serve each of them will help us drive engagement. When thinking about these personas, think about what value they will derive from community to make sure you're appealing to all audiences. I've got content as the base of the pyramid here because valuable content is really going to be the basis of a strong community. There's no getting around it. So let's start talking about how you can get that quality, relevant content. I think it's super important to make sure you've got a content calendar. I use Monday.com just because that's what we already had internally, but I love that it can send automatic reminders when things are coming due. But there's tons of pieces of software out there that can do the same. Worst case scenario, a good old Excel doc or a Google Sheet can do the job. The main point is make sure that you've decided on a cadence for posting and that you're making sure that happens on a consistent basis. When asking folks to contribute to the community, the biggest mistake I've made was to go to team meetings, send Slack messages and channels with tons of people, and send emails to teams, and then hear nothing back. Vague asks to large groups of people creates bystander syndrome. Maybe one or two people will raise their hands, but the majority will not. I had done this over and over again, expecting it to magically work. I think they call that the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I banged my head against the wall for a while doing this, and I finally got the good sense to change my approach. And I went from like a 2% success rate to like 100% success rate in terms of getting buy-in for folks to create content for the community. Here's what I learned. Don't ask a group. Ask a person one-on-one. Leverage your personal relationships in your org. And even if you're the new kid on the block, get out of your comfort zone and make friends quick. Secondly, come at them with a specific ask. Asking someone to just post can create decision fatigue and start them off with a sense of overwhelm. It's so much better to ask Kara, the CSM, to write a Tip Tuesday post on December 7th than to ask a room full of people to just broadly post in community. I find that creating a bit of scaffolding, something like Tip Tuesday worked well for us, can be super helpful to just give folks a basic sense of what you want and get them started. If you know something about the person that you're asking, try and tie the ask to something you know that they're already good at, so that they're starting from a point of confidence. A lot of folks might not have a background in writing, and they might feel a sense of imposter syndrome. Like, who am I to be posting in community? Isn't that for journalists and copywriters and marketing people? But at the end of the day, they are likely out there having great conversations already, or sending emails to customers with amazing insights. It stands to reason that people in customer success probably know a thing or two about how to make your customers more successful. If you know something that they're already doing really well, you can start them off with a sense of confidence that will make them more likely to say yes and more likely to create amazing content. And if you feel comfortable, offer to help them proofread or copyright their content. Even if you need to cheat and use Grammarly or ChatGPT, this can often remove a mental hurdle from folks and make them feel much more supported in the process. I also encourage you to review any analytics that you might have, maybe popular posts from the community or what folks are searching for to come up with topic ideas. You don't have to post them all at once, but you might be glad that you've got a pool of ideas in your back pocket when creating your calendar. Another great area for posts tends to be release notes. Often release notes can be technical and dry, so pick the most exciting releases and speak to the value of those releases. Bring to your customers how new features and enhancements can help them be more successful with your product and give real-world examples. And finally, remember, community is not a blog. Think about how your content can not only help your customers be successful, but how you can position content to encourage them to continue the conversation with each other. You don't have to have all the answers. It's totally fine, actually better to ask the community what they think and how they're using a certain feature or approaching a new idea or problem. You might be surprised by the collective wisdom. I know I have on so many occasions. All right. The next facet that I want to explore is basic gamification. Users should feel the warm and fuzzy of helping people, of feeling smart and knowledgeable. They should be in community for those intrinsic benefits and not just to get badges and internet points. Call out people for attaining ranks, but use language that refers to their helpfulness, their kindness. Remember, these are humans, not video game levels. I also personally think it's a lot better to surprise and delight people along the way for their achievements rather than to bribe them. It's fine to give users tangible benefits, but be mindful as to how you position it. Speaking about intrinsic and extrinsic benefits, the point of gamification is ultimately going to be to help drive a sense of community. You can also drive a sense of community by making community the hub of your enablement and success efforts. Ideally, create technical integrations with other sites in your ecosystem. Maybe that means giving a badge or a ribbon or a rank, depending on what software you use, to users when they complete certain courses or attend certain events. If you don't have the technical resources today, try and at least link to different properties from community and have those areas link back to community as much as possible to make it feel like a really holistic ecosystem. One of my favorite integrations to make community the hub is connecting e-learning to community. You can do this from a technical perspective, but I also encourage you to do it in a practical sense. If your training involves using test data, maybe host it in community. If a particular feature of your software can be used many different ways and maybe has a strategic component, can that conversation be continued in community? And think about how you can leverage community throughout the onboarding and learning process. Finally, I think one of the most important things you can do to instill a sense of community is host events in the community, particularly networking events. We like to do 2 sessions a month, one focused topical session where we're bringing information to the table and users are discussing and asking questions, and one open session where users can network and pick each other's brains on anything under the sun. If you're just talking at them, it's less likely that they're networking with each other. And it's networking that's so key to fostering that sense of community. They're so much more likely to continue the conversation, share ideas, and help each other if they know each other. I've been doing this a long time, and I would say I'm an expert on the Higher Logic Vanilla product. So when we do our sessions, which we call Vanilla Connect, it would be so easy for me to answer every single question and give my opinions. I got a lot of opinions on all the things, but that's not the point. The point is to get customers talking to each other. I'll actually keep on mute and count to 10 in my head. And so often before I get to 10, a customer ends up speaking up and answering someone else's question, which is just so much better than hearing from me all the time. And it also helps to develop their confidence and help drive them to become a future advocate. So shut up once in a while. I've had a variety of roles in customer success, from CSM to principal consultant at Higher Logic Vanilla, and I've spent a lot of time in one-on-one focused meetings with customers. These touch points are great places to understand business goals, build relationships, and have really impactful conversations. There's never going to be a replacement for these one-to-one interactions, but what about the time in between these touch points? This is where community can come in. In the spaces between meetings, community can offer a scaled success model that not only serves customers between touch points, but broadens their relationship with your organization so that they have more connections with you as an org, as well as with their peers. It's not meant to replace consultancy or CSMs or CX orgs, but to complement it so that your CX team can focus on proactive, higher impact activities rather than the reactive side of things. So when you or your colleagues in customer success find yourself doing something reactive for the 5th time, I encourage you to try and find a way to move that reactive piece to community. Personally, if I have to try and provide the same piece of advice to customers or colleagues more than once or twice, I make a point of creating community content instead and sending folks there. This isn't just with an angle of, I don't want to repeat myself all the time. It's not about that. Though admittedly, that's not a bad thing either. But if you post it in the community, you can activate a whole village of other users who might have thoughts and insights that you don't. So it's not just about saving you time to focus on more proactive aspects of customer success, but about harnessing the collective wisdom of the community and giving customers more well-rounded answers than any one single person ever could. All right. Let's move on to more advanced gamification techniques that you can use with contributors. Community and social media shoutouts, like LinkedIn shoutouts, are important to some outgoing personas, but they're not always appropriate for every community type. Always consider the type of person that you're working with and always ask permission to post. Some folks prefer simple private messages of appreciation over public shoutouts. Be mindful of the user type that you're engaging with. And as we touched on before, I think surprising and delighting your high-performing users is better over bribing them. You can still give them the t-shirt, but be mindful of what behavior you want to drive and try and make intrinsic rewards the sundae and extrinsic rewards the cherry on top. All right. Now we can look at how we might create value for creators, the folks who are actively creating content in the community. Humans are social creatures, and they often seek social validation. When others appreciate their content through feedback, content creators will feel a sense of belonging in the community, encouraging them to post more to maintain that connection. As I've noted before in the presentation, being genuine remains super important. You need to balance appreciation with constructive feedback when it's appropriate. Just saying everything is great all the time, it's going to quickly be seen as disingenuous. Be sure to promote awesome content however you can. Feature the content in a special widget or on your homepage if you have that functionality, featured in a newsletter, or link to the post on other socials or in related posts. This will make creators feel valued, and it'll also give other personas more access to great content. And finally, let's look at reward and recognition. In addition to creating an environment that fosters feedback loops and advanced gamification, consider rewarding creators by rewarding them in ways that make sense to them. That might be shout outs, tangible rewards, or special recognition. And don't hesitate to ask those users what they want. Understanding your creators will be the first steps towards advocacy in the future, so don't underestimate the value of having those genuine conversations. Okay, so if you only remember a few things from this presentation, let these be the things. So again, consider what your organizational goals are. What's going to make your execs happy? What are your departmental goals? What is your CS team struggling with? What are they trying to achieve this year? And what do your users want? How can those be best aligned? What kind of community do you have today? And what kind of community do you need to build? What's the gap between those two? And how can you get there? How mature is your community? Are you ready to take on another facet of community? Or should you really focus on what you've done so far and get the most out of that and make the current type of community the best that it can be? Create great content by leveraging personal relationships, making specific asks to specific people, and creating scaffolding with Tip Tuesday, Throwback Thursday, Analytics Tip of the Week, Feature from Your Product Tip of the Week. How can you appeal to a variety of personas? How can you make sure that those consumers, creators, and contributors all have a place in the community and are actively receiving value from the community? And finally, how can you make community the hub of your CS efforts? How can you make the knee-jerk reaction of your staff and of your end users to go straight to community? So that's what I wanted to share with you all today. I hope you found the information in this presentation valuable, but I'd really love to open up the floor to questions about all things customer success and community.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Shauna. We have had questions come in, so we can start off with those, but I would like to invite others to go ahead and submit your questions, and let's get started. So the first question we have is, how do you incentivize staff members to be active with community and contribute when it's not core to their role or job description?
I think that's a good question. So it can definitely be a challenge. I like to think about what's in it for them. So if I'm talking to, for example, somebody who's in support, I might ask them what their current ticket drivers are. And sometimes that's going to be something that I can leverage into getting them to post something proactive in the community. Other times, if they're not going to, get the buy-in to actually post, I've at least got some good subject material, subject ideas for future Tip Tuesdays or something that I can get myself or CSMs to post. Similarly, with someone like CSMs, once again, I might try and figure out what they're challenged with. Maybe that's something like demonstrating ROI, and we can just kind of talk out, well, what are some common tactics that you do to help your customers demonstrate ROI on those one-on-one calls? And then depending on how that conversation goes, I might try and encourage them to post whatever their response is, or I might run with it if that makes more sense in the use case. But just really thinking about what challenges they're facing and how community can help solve those challenges, and how driving content in the community can help solve those challenges.
Got it. I think we have another question here that's kind of related. Is, in these scenarios, is there a team or individuals who are dedicated to fostering community, Or is the person asking for content also working in another role in the organization, such as marketing or customer success?
If you can get a dedicated community manager, I think that's ideal. But I think in 2023, we've all been asked to do more with less. I would say a lot of the communities that I work with, folks have another day job. I myself wore many hats. I think that's partly just personality. I've always had about 5 jobs. But I think it's pretty common to have somebody sitting in CS or marketing that does own the community. And that can be a challenge, right? When you've got a day job and you've got community. So I think it comes when you're in that situation, it comes back to tying your day job to community. So in my case, I was principal consultant, as well as in charge of scalable efforts, as well as in charge of community. So when one of my customers would ask me a question that I thought the community could be helpful with, or a more junior member of the team came with me with an advice question, sometimes it makes sense to be one-on-one, but so often I would say, that's a great question. I have some thoughts on that, but I bet the community also has thoughts on that. Why don't I write up my answer for you in community and I'll tag you or I'll email it to you? But this way we can kind of like ask everybody else what they're doing and get a more holistic answer.
I like that idea. Let's see. Our next question is, I'm being tasked with creating an advocacy/peer community from the ground up. Have you ever encountered community resistance due to the customer need or desire to protect company assets? For example, we work with a lot of government and legal firms that may not want to openly brainstorm on a forum.
So I've definitely seen that with a couple different communities that I've worked with in the legal and financial sectors. I think there's a couple things that you can do there. You can try and focus on aspects that can be discussed in a more anonymized way. You can insist that folks use more anonymous usernames. So instead of Shauna McClemens, I might be German Shepherd Lover or something like that. And you may need to have a little bit more of an aggressive moderation approach to make sure that, when folks are discussing something, they're not including screenshots that may have more sensitive information. And that may cause you a little bit more overhead in terms of moderation. However, if you can assure companies of those things, you're going to be much more likely to get that buy-in for folks to allow their employees into community. So just being a little tighter on the moderation, the anonymization, and focusing perhaps on more general stuff. So like maybe instead of talking about, a particular financial or legal use case, it's more about, hey, there's these big regulatory changes. How are you all handling that? And bringing the conversation a little bit more high level, because I think it's those granular areas that tend to have more sensitive information within them.
Yeah, I think that's really great considerations and some great workarounds as well. Our next question is, we do not have a community featured enabled yet. Do you have any tips for loading content when it's currently a blank space? I'm hesitant about publishing a space to our customer base that doesn't have much content while it's just starting out.
Great question as well. So I think that this would be a really great opportunity to engage beta users. So this can be a good way to get staff involved. I know that when I was trying to revamp the community, our recent discussions list would be like, Shauna, 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 and that's not a good look, right? So you may want to, like, I would even say, listen, I wrote it, just go post it under your name. So getting a variety of content from staff, and then maybe talking to, some super users you already have, or maybe leveraging personal relationships that you or others in your CS team has with customers. And I think that can actually help foster a sense of community where you can go and say, hey, so-and-so, you have a really great use case. We're going to be starting this community. What do you want out of community? Kind of make it about them a little bit. Would you be willing to post about your use case, during this sneak preview? And at the same time, you get the sneak preview, you can provide us feedback on the community, and, you can give them like a early adopter badge or a founder's badge and kind of angle it in a sense of, I want your opinion. This community is for you, but also can you write X content? And again, with that precise, specific ask.
I love that. Starting with, some of your super users, and I'm sure that is makes them feel great that you're coming to them. So I love that idea.
All about the fuzzies.
Yeah, right. Let's see. What is the best strategy for launching a community? Emails and a video in the community itself, or a webinar? What do you recommend? I think
I think
for the initial announcements.
I think that it'll really depend, and I like to do a variety of stuff. I've talked to so many different people, and some people love videos, some people hate videos, some people prefer written content. So I think having a mix of those things, like maybe you've got an email that's got that, what do you call it, an elevator pitch within the email of the value of community, and then maybe there's an embedded, like a video in there. So they've got kind of that elevator pitch that's going to tempt them to click on the video, but you've also got the text version of that. I don't think I've seen anybody do a webinar. I think that could work if you have a really big user base that you want to activate. But what I've seen folks do is get folks who they might engage as those beta users or as their early adopters and just get on a conversational Zoom call. Ask people what they want to get out of community. Ask them what gaps they see in your CS today, and how they want to engage with other users, and doing that as kind of a beta program, and then moving those same people into like a launch party type of vibe could be fun.
I like that. Our next question is, you talked about persona. So the question is it possible to have a company that would have multiple communities, one for enablement, one for ambassadors and advocates, and another for external groups? If so, what's the best way to manage these without becoming confusing to participants in multiple communities?
That's a good one as well. And so I think part of that's probably going to depend on the vendor that you choose and the way that you are able to set up multiple communities. I'm so sorry, my dog just did something crazy. But at the sorry, that just distracted me. But at the end of the day, I think that the big question is going to be, what is the cross-pollination? Are there going to be personas who may be interested in several of these communities, or is each community going to be really a specific persona? Because if you do have a sense of cross-pollination where a particular persona may be interested in multiple different types of communities, at that point, you might want to have them as just like kind of categories or subtopics, depends on your functionality once again, but where a persona can go in and access all of those places in one place will make sense if there is that cross-pollination. Whereas if the interest is very siloed into those different areas, like I'm thinking about a use case where developers might just care about developer stuff, or partners might just care about partner stuff, then you may want to silo them a bit more and have more targeted marketing. But I think in a lot of contexts, there is that element of cross-pollination, and you might want to have them all in one place and then utilize functionality like, showing different tiles to different personas if you've got that functionality, and say like, hey, it looks like you're a developer, so this area of the community might interest you. It looks like you're an onboarding user, so you might be more interested in our onboarding resources and our learning materials, and that sort of thing. So just kind of sending folks to the places you think that they're most likely to be interested in. And if it is that bespoke thing, making sure that you're sending out tailored communications to those folks.
Got it. Thank you. Our next question says, right now we have folks from support, product, etc. contributing to the community, but posts can span from dull and technical to vibrant and exciting. Do you have any recommendations on how to get internal folks on the same page in regards to quality of content? Or maybe the different tones are okay. What are your thoughts?
I've heard a lot of different things about this. And while I do think that quality is important, the quality pieces are going to come up, and you might provide people with tips, or you might offer copywriting, but just be cautious, because if you make folks jump through a lot of hoops, they're just not going to do it, right? And so if I've got folks who are posting things that might not be the best, but have some opportunity for growth, I might try and do like a compliment sandwich, like this part was good, you could improve this part was good, that kind of thing. And maybe help them a little bit, maybe offer to copyright, maybe, do a little bit of coaching. But I would be cautious about saying, make sure it's X, Y, and Z, and I've got to approve it, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that.
Yeah.
Because if you just make it too hard and too accessible, you're going to make people feel bad. And if they feel bad, they're not going to continue to participate. So I do think that you need to do it with a great deal of diplomacy. And I would rather have a couple posts that, maybe aren't as super polished, because I think it makes community a little bit more authentic and real. We're not talking about blogs, right? We're talking about real human and real communications.
Mhm.
And, just help them polish it, but don't try and make it seem like they've got to be Shakespeare every time.
Yeah, I think that approach makes a lot of sense. Our next question says, for companies without an existing community, any advice for making the business case to leadership to create one? Are there any clear links to increased revenue?
Yeah, so I don't have the stats in front of me, but there's a couple of different I'll see if I can find the resources and post them on like a blog post or LinkedIn or something. But there's a couple of different ways that you can approach the ROI depending on what use case you're going for. So for something like ticket deflection, you can get numbers with respect to like how much does a ticket cost your org, and it's usually I've heard different things, but usually you hear between like 20 and $50, for a ticket that goes through Zendesk to a support agent. And if you can kind of say, well, if somebody gets that answering community rather than filing a support ticket, we can get a sense of how much a page view is worth for that ticket deflection. And I think that there's the other side of the coin too, where maybe it's not ticket deflection, maybe it's something like retention. And with a new community, it can be a little bit more difficult. There have been studies on this, but I was able to find a really good link for my community where we were saying, look, if we look at our CRM software and we look at the like the happiness of customers, if they're very satisfied or not at all satisfied, if they're a churn risk, how is that affected if they have somebody in community? And if you can show that by having, one person from an organization in community, it brings them, 20% happier or 20% less likely to churn, those numbers can really make sense. So I think it depends on what metrics that your execs that you're talking to care about today. Is that retention? Is that ticket deflection? Is it something like advocacy? Like if somebody's in community, they're X% more likely to give a referral to the sales team, things like that. But I think you've got to kind of think about what the execs want to hear and think about how that ties into what your users need. And then kind of from there, go backwards and find the metrics, do some Googling, do some research, and I'll see if I can put some resources up on LinkedIn because I know they're out there.
Awesome. Yeah, I think those are some great tips for making the case. I still have so many questions. This is great. I love the engaged group. So the next question. Yeah. The next question is, right now, our community is only accessible to active customers. Our sales team would love to have us open it up to allow non-customers to see the engagement and ask questions. Any thoughts on this being a good or bad move, or any considerations we should think about if we were to make the community public?
That's a great question. I love having our sales team involved. I've got a couple sales guys that post regularly in the community, which I absolutely love. And they actually came to me and said, we want to let certain prospects into the community. So a couple things I would recommend: be really transparent, talk to your sales guys, or sales women, talk to your sales group, talk to your whoever's the manager of your sales team, have those conversations about any concerns that they might have, any pros, cons, all those sorts of good things. I personally think that prospects should be very clearly vetted. They should maybe have a specific role. So perhaps they don't see everything that the rest of your customers can see. Maybe product ideation is a little bit more hidden, for example, or other aspects of the community. You might want to have specific calls to action on there for prospects, like got more questions, get a demo, things like that. And depending on your model and how you work today, I found in our community, it made sense to only let in prospects who are at a certain point in the sales cycle, that were vetted by the sales guys or the sales team, and had a really good idea of where they were and how much they knew about the product already. They'd already kind of been through that initial discovery and they wanted to come in a little bit deeper. So do it mindfully. Think about what they can access and have those conversations with your sales team, since they're going to kind of know the prospects and where they're at in the cycle more than all. And like for us, we have a dedicated Slack channel to talk about it and just keep those lines of communication open.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's the benefits to it, but you just have to, think through what you might want to lock down. I think that makes sense. We have a question that says, can you give some creative examples of user-generated content campaigns?
Yeah, so the way that I've approached this has been very grassroots. I've been at Vanilla for 6.5 years. I know a ton of our customers, and I get pulled in to consult on calls with different folks all the time. And a lot of the time I'll say, that is so awesome. Do you think you would ever post on community? I know people would love to see this. And be honest, like, if it's something interesting and you want to try and get them to share it, a lot of the time folks will be completely down. They'll be like, awesome. I think a lot of people have that imposter syndrome where the only reason they're not posting is because no one said, that's great, post. So I've had that very grassroots campaign to that. And once you've got them doing that, you might see them continuing to post. The other thing is again, those events, right? When folks are in those, we call ours Vanilla Connect, when they're in those events and they say cool things, I'll often put the call notes and be like, hey, at this person said this really great point, at this person said this really great point. And often they'll expand on that conversation in the community. They'll comment on the Vanilla Connect thread, or they'll make another post that expands on the point that they made in the event. So I think just being genuine and interested and curious and encouraging them to post is one of the best things that you can do.
I love that. Let's see, we just have a few minutes left, so trying to find a question that might be good. Let's see, what are some ways you celebrate users without bribing them, as you said?
Yeah. So, and I don't hate swag. I think it's like a good thing to send out once in a while. We did swag with handwritten notes for folks that were already performing well. I like to do a community roundup post that kind of says, so-and-so just hit this rank. We use ranks in our particular community. So-and-so just hit this rank. Awesome job. This person's the next one who might hit it. Are they going to do it soon? So-and-so's got competition, kind of making it a little bit fun. And again, calling out those warm and fuzzy qualities, so-and-so was so kind to respond to all these questions. So-and-so is so knowledgeable on this topic. And just kind of adding that personal effect and, speaking to those human qualities that underlie the gamification stuff.
Got it. Let's see, let's make this our last question. And then, as we said, we can maybe do a blog post, follow-up blog post with all of these additional questions that we didn't have time for. Yep. The question is, how do you address possible detractors who may post negatively in the community or look to use the community as a tool for complaining about certain experiences?
Well, you're going to get that. This is a true thing that you're going to get. And I think that it's kind of the art of customer relationship management. Don't delete the post unless they're being abusive or hateful. Don't delete the post. Hit it head on. It might be a conversation to have with your CS leaders in the org. If it's something really bad, I might have conversations, with our director of customer experience or whoever on how we want to approach something, or with our product team. If it's a product issue, have those internal conversations and then hit it on and assume that when somebody is being negative, it's because they're hurting in one way or another. They have a problem that they need solving. They're feeling crappy because they can't attain a goal they want to attain or solve a problem they want to solve. And it's really hard. It's super hard. But assume that they're being hurtful or complaining because they're hurt and because they have a problem, and try and focus on how you can help solve that problem for them. Or, if there's workarounds, and if in a worst case scenario, sometimes you can't do anything, approach with empathy, be genuine, be a human. And, you might have to be diplomatic and, afterwards you might need to go for a walk in the forest and, get it off your chest, but hit it head on as best you can with as much empathy as you can muster.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And also, just as you said, be aware that it's going to happen, so you aren't surprised. And
Yeah, I think everybody in CS has, dealt with unhappy customers, and it's the same thing in community. It's more public, so it feels scarier. But if you see someone post something negative about a brand and the brand deletes it or responds with the same negative energy, you're going to have a bad taste in your mouth. Whereas if someone says something negative and a brand replies with empathy, you're going to feel better about that brand, because everyone knows people complain. That's no secret. And so I think it's, you can own the response.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Shauna, for this great presentation and also a really great Q&A session. We got through so many questions, and we have more, so we'll get to those, as we said. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and remind you that we did record the session. We'll be sending out an email tomorrow with a link to the recording, a PDF of these slides that Shauna walked us through, as well as a handout that was also mentioned in the presentation that you can use as a great resource. So at the end of this webcast, you'll see a brief survey pop up. We'd appreciate if you just take a moment before logging off to complete that, to provide your feedback on our thought leadership webinar series in today's webinar. And thanks again for joining us, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. And thanks, Shauna.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Corey.
Bye.